Have you ever heard someone say, "I don't talk to my family anymore," and immediately felt a kind of quiet shock? Maybe part of you thought, how could someone do that? Because family is supposed to be everything, right? Blood is thicker than water. You forgive, you stay, you make it work. That's the story we're told. But then, there's another reality. A quieter one. The kind people don't usually talk about openly. The kind where staying hurts more than leaving. And suddenly the question shifts. Not, how could they cut off their family? But, what happened that made that feel like the only option? Because no one wakes up one day and casually decides to disconnect from the people who raised them. That decision is almost always the end of a very long story. Let me take you into that story. Imagine a child growing up in a home where something always feels slightly off. Maybe it's constant criticism disguised as advice. Maybe it's emotional distance. Maybe it's unpredictability, love one day, silence the next. Nothing dramatic enough to point at and say, that's the moment everything broke. But enough to slowly shape how the child sees themselves. Because a child doesn't question the family system. They question themselves. If something feels wrong, it must be me. So they adapt. They become the peacemaker. The overachiever. The quiet one. The one who doesn't cause trouble. Not because that's who they truly are, but because that's who they need to be to maintain connection. And connection, for a child, is everything. It's survival. Now here's where it gets complicated. As that child grows up, they don't just leave those patterns behind. They carry them into friendships, into relationships, into how they treat themselves. They might constantly seek approval, overextend themselves, or feel guilty for having boundaries. They might tolerate behavior that hurts them, because some part of their brain still believes, this is what love feels like. But over time, something starts to shift. It's subtle at first. Maybe they meet someone who treats them differently. With respect. With consistency. With kindness that doesn't feel conditional. And it creates a kind of internal confusion. Because now there's a contrast. And once you see a contrast, you can't unsee it. Suddenly, things that once felt normal start to feel uncomfortable. Comments that used to roll off their back now sting. Silences feel heavier. Patterns become clearer. And the brain starts asking a new question. Is this actually okay? That question is powerful. Because for many people, it's the beginning of awareness. And awareness can be both liberating and painful. Because now you're not just feeling hurt. You're understanding it. And understanding changes your tolerance. Things you once endured quietly now feel harder to ignore. And this is often where people start trying to fix things. They communicate. They explain. They set boundaries. They say things like, this hurts me. Or, I need space. Or, can we talk about this? And sometimes it works. But other times? It doesn't. The same patterns repeat. The same dismissals happen. The same emotional dynamics stay intact. And this creates one of the most painful psychological experiences a person can go through. Not just being hurt, but not being heard. Because when you finally find the courage to express your truth, and it's minimized, ignored, or turned against you, it reinforces something deep. Maybe my feelings don't matter here. Now, let's pause for a second. Because this is where a lot of people misunderstand the decision to cut off family. They think it's impulsive, emotional, even selfish. But in reality, it's often the opposite. It's what happens after repeated attempts to make things work have failed. It's what happens when staying connected starts to feel like self-betrayal. There's a concept in psychology called self-preservation. Your brain and body are wired to protect you from harm. Not just physical harm, but emotional harm too. So when a relationship, any relationship, consistently causes stress, anxiety, or pain, your system starts looking for ways to reduce that exposure. Sometimes that means creating distance. Sometimes it means setting boundaries. And sometimes it means walking away. even if that relationship is family. Now, this doesn't mean the decision is easy. In fact, it's often incredibly painful. Because you're not just losing a relationship. You're grieving an idea. The idea of what your family could have been. The hope that maybe one day things would change. The version of connection you wished for. And that grief doesn't disappear just because you created distance. It stays. Quiet, complicated, sometimes resurfacing in unexpected ways. Like on holidays. Or when you see other families interacting in ways you long for. Or when a small part of you still wonders, did I make the right choice? And here's the truth. Two things can exist at the same time. You can miss your family, and still know that distance is healthier for you. You can feel love, and also recognize that the relationship is harmful. Human emotions aren't simple. They don't follow clean lines. They overlap, contradict, coexist. And that's okay. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. When someone cuts off their family, they're often doing something psychologically profound. They're breaking a pattern. Family systems tend to repeat themselves across generations. Ways of communicating, handling conflict, expressing emotions, they get passed down, often unconsciously. So when one person steps back and says, I don't want to continue this pattern, it disrupts that cycle. And disruption is uncomfortable. Not just for them, but for everyone involved. Because change challenges familiarity. Even if that familiarity wasn't healthy. And this is why people who distance themselves from family are often misunderstood. Because from the outside, it looks like rejection. But from the inside, it often feels like survival. Like finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. Now, here's something important. Cutting off family isn't the only solution. For some people, boundaries are enough. For others, limited contact works. And for some, distance becomes necessary. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Because every family dynamic is different. Every history is different. Every person's threshold is different. But what remains consistent is the underlying psychology. The need to feel safe. To feel respected. To feel seen. And when those needs aren't met, the brain doesn't just ignore it. It responds. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes drastically. But always, meaningfully. If you've never experienced this, it might be hard to fully understand. And that's okay. But if you have, you probably know exactly what this feels like. The long internal debate. The guilt. The second guessing. The relief mixed with sadness. It's not a simple story. It's not a clean break. It's a process. And often, it's one of the most difficult decisions a person will ever make. But here's the part that often gets overlooked. Choosing distance doesn't mean you're heartless. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've reached a point where caring about yourself became necessary. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to understand. Because at the end of the day, relationships are meant to support your well-being, not slowly erode it. Even the ones we're born into. So if you've ever judged someone for stepping away from their family, maybe pause and consider the story you can't see. And if you're someone who's gone through this yourself, maybe instead of asking, why did it come to this? You can gently ask, what was I trying to protect? Because that question changes everything. It shifts the narrative from blame to understanding. And understanding is where healing begins. If this topic resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think people are judged too quickly for decisions like this, or is there more to the story than we usually see?